Hello and welcome back to my channel. On this video, I'm going to talk about all of the books that I read in the month of November 2025. And as usual, there were some pretty good ones on my list, so let's go ahead and dive in. The first book that I picked up in the month is a David Baldacci novel called The 620 Man. And I had read a different David Baldacci the month before that was kind of like this historical fiction. And I was a little bit let down by it because I'm used to David Baldacci as a thriller writer and kind of like he does like spy thrillers and things like that. And this one was way more in that vein. It is about a financial analyst who gets kind of pulled into the situation where an ex-girlfriend of his is found dead at work. And so he's like trying to figure out what happened. And it was very quick moving. I listened to it on audio, really enjoyed that one. Then I picked up If We Survive This by Raquel Marie. And this is a YA post-apocalyptic like zombie survival novel where you have a bunch of teenagers basically who are trying to ride out the situation where like a bunch of people are being turned into zombies. I definitely felt the YA nature of this book. I thought it was well done and I liked it, but I feel like it was definitely, obviously, written for a younger audience. And I think that when I read kind of the post-apocalyptic stuff, I tend to enjoy it when it is more adult fiction. All right, then I picked up the novella on audio, You Can Thank Me Later by Kelly Harms. And I have read some like really short novellas lately that I found like relatively unsatisfying because they weren't really getting the depth of the character development. This is a novella that takes place over like 3 Thanksgivings over different years. I loved the character development in this one. I thought that you had this kind of like really nice family dynamic. There's obviously things that are happening to the family over the course of these years that you're getting kind of updates on over the course of the novella. So this is a short, quick read, but very seasonal because it takes place on Thanksgiving. All right, then I read Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hersey. And this is a kind of manifesto. I was familiar with this book because I follow this person who is also part of an organization called the Nap Ministry on social media. And so I was aware of kind of the work. And really what this book is about is kind of pushing back against kind of traditional notions of productivity and how we need to be resting more than what kind of typical society and capitalist society is telling us that we should do. I think that this is a pretty radical argument. Maybe it shouldn't be a radical argument, but it is kind of a radical argument just given our culture in the West. But I appreciated it and I was glad that I picked it up this past month. All right, then I read a book called Your Future Self by Hal Hershfield. And this is a book that basically talks about the science behind how we can think about our future selves in a different kind of way that changes the actions that we have today so that it's a more positive influence on our future selves. And part of that science kind of argues that if you feel disconnected from your future self, you're not as likely to make decisions that would be good for you in the future. So financial decisions or health decisions, or even like habits and routines that you might have in the present that would impact you positively in the future. I think this kind of science is fascinating. So I was really glad that I picked up this book. I do think that having this kind of like felt sense of the future self does help you to act now in a way that is kind of positively influencing your future. So I really like that one. Then I read the book When Breath Becomes Air. This is a memoir by the now deceased Paul Kalanithi. And basically like the premise of this book is kind of heartbreaking. It's about a doctor who's in training to become a surgeon. And when he's kind of in the late stages of his residency, he is diagnosed with cancer and it's pretty aggressive. He has lung cancer and he goes through treatment and this is a pretty well-known story. I don't think I'm giving away any spoilers here, but he ends up dying. And he writes this book, kind of about this experience of being a doctor, going through this experience and this situation and having spent like a very large portion of his life training in medicine and then like, not that he doesn't make a difference, but like that is kind of wasted in some ways because then he dies of cancer as a relatively young person. So this is a book that I've had on my radar for a really long time. And I think that it was really beautifully written. It's obviously kind of a heartbreaking story, for him and his family and his colleagues. But I'm glad that I was finally able to pick that up. All right, then I picked up a book called Master Your Next Move. This is by Michael Watkins. And this is a book that's kind of a follow-on to the general idea of like, when you start a job, what are you going to do in your first 90 days, of that job? But this is also trying to think about like very particular scenarios of like, are you like being promoted within the same organization? Are you coming into a new organization from somewhere else? Are you promoted over a team that you used to be a member of that team, so now you are overseeing your previous colleagues? Like, he kind of works through all these different scenarios and talks about some of the common challenges that people experience when they go through these kinds of transitions. I just thought it was really interesting. I'm always interested in kind of career books, leadership books, and this definitely fell into that category. All right, next up, I picked up a book called An Overdue Match by Sarah Monzon, and I had never read this author before. This is a book about a librarian and a tattoo artist who have a romance. And the librarian has the disorder, which I'm not going to be able to remember the name for this off the top of my head. Let me see if it's named in the book description here. She has the disorder called, is it in the description? It is not, which surprises me. Let me see if anybody mentions it in their reviews. I am not seeing it. So I will not remember what this is, but basically she has, I think it's like an autoimmune disorder where you cannot grow hair. Like, your hair falls out of your head, it falls out of your body. So she over time has become hairless. She wears a wig, but this is something that has like affected her past relationships and romances. And then she basically has this new romance, and a big part of her kind of like coming to self-acceptance and acceptance in this relationship is that he embraces, this part of her. And I actually really liked this book. I will say about 75% of the way through, maybe like 60 to 75% of the way through, somewhere in there, there is an element of this that kind of like turns it into a Christian romance, which I did not see coming and was not part of the description. So I just offer that because sometimes that is something that people are not seeking out. It is not heavy hitting, in terms of what is going on in this book, but it is an element of this book, and it does come up later on in the narrative. So for what it's worth. But what I really liked about this one, I like romances that have librarians in them. I mean, like, I love books, I love libraries. I thought that was a really fun element of this. All right, then I picked up Nick and Noelle's Christmas Playlist by Cody Hall. And this book had some cute elements to it. It's basically about two childhood friends who eventually have a romance together. The thing that I found a little bit unbelievable about this is both of them had been in several different relationships throughout their adult lives. The male main character had been in like an 8-year relationship that like thought was going toward marriage and then ends up breaking up. And it just felt like both of them learned like nothing about how to be in a mature adult relationship. And we see all of these problems and issues like coming out when they're starting to try to have a relationship with each other. And they just skewed in my mind a lot younger than what they actually were in the book. And it made me think that like those small details could have been shifted to say like he had less time in this relationship, or like they were actually younger, when they started to form this relationship between each other as friends, or, whatever you want to do. But it felt like because they were seen as like older and they had these experiences, these life experiences, that they would know more about how to have like healthy, mature relationships. So that part hung me up a little bit on this one. I felt like there were some kind of like rookie things that were happening here that made it feel like a little bit of a weird mismatch with their age. All right, then I read Fake Skating by Lynn Painter. And this is a book about a fake dating romance of two high school students. It is YA. I think Lynn Painter can do no wrong. Like, I've loved every book that she's done. There's banter, there's humor, there's cute, kind of like meet cute, romance elements to all of her books. And I really like this one. So I will continue to pick up books from her in the future. Then, as kind of a palate cleanser, I read the graphic novel of The Secret Garden. And this was something that I like randomly stumbled across it. And I love The Secret Garden. I probably read that book a dozen times. And I had not seen the graphic novel version. And so I just thought it was fun. And so I picked it up and read through that this past month. All right, then I picked up a book called The Squiggly Career by Helen Tupper. And this is a book that, as I mentioned before, I really enjoy reading books on career. And one of the things that I appreciate is books that kind of acknowledge that there's not like a linear career ladder anymore for a lot of people in a lot of industries. You're kind of just like moving around. It's more squiggly. It's, some people describe it as like a climbing wall versus a ladder. And I think this book did a nice job of talking about some of the factors that have created that situation for people, and basically like what to do, you know, like if you're finding yourself in a career that you're trying to kind of navigate and be strategic in, what does that look like? So I like that one as well. Then I picked up a book called The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams. And this is a book that was really, really lovely. I don't know what I was expecting out of this book, but it was a lot deeper than I thought it would be. It's basically the story of a number of different people. Like there's a number of different character POVs in this book, and they all find this reading list, or they interact with it in some way that's found in like this library. And the reading list has like a number of different books that you would recognize on it. Like I think it's got like Pride and Prejudice, and I'm not going to remember all of these different books, but you know, some classic novels and also some like popular novels. And people start to interact with this reading list and like read the books on it. And they all have these different kind of like intersecting narratives. There's a person who's a librarian, you know, in this library. There's a man who's grieving the death of his wife. There is just like a number of different people. And there's also this cultural component of the man that is grieving the death of his wife, I believe he's from India. And he has daughters that are kind of struggling with also the death of the mother. And like, he is not necessarily ready to move on, but he's like starting to form relationships and like create a community for himself, because he is now, you know, without his partner. And that's really hard, you know, for them. And so there's kind of these elements of that with the family. Anyway, it was just like really lovely, and I really enjoyed it. I think I was expecting something that was a little bit more surface, and it ended up being like quite deep and having a lot of really nice kind of like life lessons to take away about like where this, and you find out in the end where this reading list came from, and it brings kind of this full circle narrative together. It was really a nice one. All right, then I picked up a book called Refuse to Choose by Barbara Sher. And this is subtitled, Use All of Your Interests, Passions, and Hobbies to Create the Life and Career of Your Dreams. What I thought was really interesting about this book, given a lot of the other reading that I have done around neurodivergence and in particular ADHD, is this is basically a book for people who have ADHD. Like, I mean, I think it's mentioned once, like really early on, and the author has come up with this other name for what she calls this, and I can't remember what she calls it. She describes people as scanners. So it's people who don't have like a single interest, but they have multiple interests. So she calls them scanners. But the more I read this book, I was like, this is people who have ADHD. Like, it is like textbook ADHD of people who have lots of varied interests, who struggle to like stay hooked into one topic, who want to explore multiple things and have the freedom to do that. What's great about this book, despite the fact that it doesn't name that, and it's not like kind of like tying itself to that audience, which maybe there's reasons for that I don't know what they are, is the author does give very practical like tips, tools, suggestions for how to build a career if this is you. Like if you are struggling to kind of stay in one industry, stay in one job, stay in one topic. And I really liked the practical nature of this. I will say I was a little bit confused by why this wasn't named as like a form of neurodivergence, because like that is just such a very typical way that it could have been hooked in. And not to say like people, like if you have this issue and you are a scanner, that must mean you have ADHD. I just know it's a very common component of ADHD that people struggle with, or just find as a characteristic of their ADHD. So that part, like once I got over that, I was like, okay, there's a lot of practical, like really interesting things here in terms of career and guidance that I could definitely recommend, you know, to my coaching clients and other people who are kind of in this boat, where they're interested in kind of the scanning stuff. So I really liked that. I would definitely find out, there's other books by this author. I think some of them are a little bit dated, but I would probably pick them up just to kind of see what are some of the tips and suggestions that she offers. All right, then I picked up a book called The Irish Goodbye, and this is a book about 3 adult sisters who have like this shared history of this tragedy, and they're coming together over a Thanksgiving weekend. And this reminded me a lot of the book Sandwich, which I read, I think last month. And I would say this is a book that I had seen other people talking about. I would say it's pretty standard, like literary fiction. I appreciated that it took place over Thanksgiving. Like it was a nice like seasonal read for November. I would highly recommend, reading it in November. But it wasn't like a standout to me. I mean, it wasn't something that I was like wanting to pick up again or like completely wowed by, but it was solid. And I thought that it had kind of some nice, like emotional punch when it came to like this tragedy and like how these sisters were navigating through that. All right, then I picked up It's Different This Time by Joss Richard. This is a book about a second chance romance. Two people who are in a relationship together. They kind of break up and don't see each other for a very long time. And then they get thrown back together when somebody leaves them a house. They were like former roommates and somebody leaves them this place that they were roommates in. And they have to kind of like come back and navigate like the second chance of coming back together. This takes place in New York. It's very New York vibes. It's very fall vibes, as you can see from the cover. So I think that this is a book that a lot of people have like really enjoyed just because of the vibes. I enjoyed this as well. I mean, I wasn't like completely blown away by it in the way that I think some other people have been, but I would definitely pick up other things by this author because I liked a lot of the elements of what she was pulling together in this relationship. All right, then I read The It Girl by Ruth Ware. And one of the things that I find interesting about Ruth Ware, and I'm actually going to check this. So Ruth Ware in general, I feel like has lower ratings, like typically in the 3 to 4 range on Goodreads. For me, Ruth Ware books are typically 4 to 5s. Like there's something about the plotting, like it's very intricate. She has kind of, it's almost like a police procedural feel, but like not quite because it's not always from like a detective point of view, but there's always a crime that kind of like, usually there's kind of like a historical component and a modern day component and it goes back and forth, which is the case here. This is about a bunch of people who are in school together and somebody dies. And then it's like in contemporary time, the person that they thought had committed the murder, that person dies. And so like it's like, everything's brought to the surface again in terms of like who actually committed this murder and what happened. Great twist at the end. A little bit long. I mean, this is kind of what I wonder is like, are these books underrated for people or they're rating them lower because they're just long? Because other books I've read by Ruth Ware, like they have a lot of like length, but like there's purpose to the length. I don't feel like they're under edited. I don't feel like they should be shorter. But I do wonder if people just feel like they're long books and so they lose interest or something like that. I never lose interest in a Ruth Ware. So I haven't read all of them. I'm working my way through her backlist. But this one in particular, like it was a higher rating for me than I think typically what I'm seeing for other people. And I'm not entirely sure why. I may go and read some of the reviews and try to understand like what is it about Ruth Ware that I'm really enjoying? And maybe it's because I enjoy mysteries and I've read a lot of mysteries. This is definitely sitting in the mystery genre. So I don't know, but if you're a mystery reader, I would highly recommend this author. And I thought this book was great. All right, then I picked up 50/50, which is another Steve Kavanaugh. I continue to work my way through his series about this kind of like lawyer who is also like a criminal, basically, like he's a con man. And this is a book about two sisters who go to trial for killing their father, and they're each accusing the other one of killing the father. And you get this point of view in the chapters that is not named of the sister who actually did it. So you're kind of hearing from that person. You have the lawyer who's defending one sister who is the main character who's in this series. And then you have this other sister who's being defended by another lawyer. And I actually thought, like, what's great about these Steve Kavanaugh mysteries and thrillers, like kind of legal thrillers, is the premises he's coming up with are really, really fun. And these are books that they're by an author who I believe is in Ireland. And so they're being translated into like, or I shouldn't say they're being translated, they're being released in the US in a different order than I think they were written originally. So not all of them are available, but as they're becoming available, I'm basically just working my way through this series and really, really liking it. It's creative, it's fun, it's got great twists. So this is one that I'm really enjoying. All right, then I picked up a book called Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. And what is funny about this book is when I picked it up originally, I assumed just based on the title, this was some kind of fantasy novel. And when I started to read the back of it, it's actually a contemporary novel about a Native American girl that is like helping the FBI solve crimes, which I was just not like anticipating that. And I wasn't paying attention. Like I just kind of made an assumption because of the title and was completely wrong in terms of the genre. And this one had it's YA. It has some really lovely elements of bringing in Native American culture into the storyline, into what's happening in this community. And basically, it's about like a certain kind of drug that's being brought into this community, and this main character is starting to help the FBI by like trying to understand how elements of Native culture and history have been influencing this drug because of the kinds of things that are being put into the drug. So I really like this one. I would totally pick up other things by this author. I think this was the first book I'd read by her. And that was a really, really fun one. All right, then I picked up The Twisted Women's Book Club. This is by Karen Slaughter et al. So there's a bunch of people contributing to this. It is basically interconnected chapters of various characters who are all in the same book club in an interconnected story that every author of this contributes a different chapter, and then they all kind of like come together and resolve in the end. So it is a comprehensive narrative, but every chapter is written by a different author. I thought this was super fun. I love things like this where authors kind of come together and you can tell that like they're building off of each other's previous chapters. I would love to know how this was written. Like, did somebody write the first chapter and then like send it on to the next person and then they like kept writing from it? But it was creative, it was fun, it was atmospheric, and it had some nice twists in the end that I really enjoyed. All right, then I read The Evolving Self by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And Csikszentmihalyi is most well known for his book, well, in my opinion, most well known for his book on flow, which is like an optimum state of work where you're like losing track of time and, you know, you get into like a flow state. He's the person who coined this and kind of researched it. He also has a really fantastic book on creativity, but he is an academic. Like when you are reading these books, he is a psychologist. So he is writing these books from an academic perspective. This is the most academic book that I have, I think, read from him in the multiple books of his that I've read. He is basically talking about evolution and how we have evolved in directions that are not necessarily helping us. So for example, like one very small example that he talks about is in the past, like way in the past, we would have struggled to get salt into our bodies. Like the amount of salt that we would have had in like a 3-week period that we would have gotten from various animals and nature and other kinds of things that we would have ingested into our bodies, we can now have like multiple amounts of that in like a day or a meal, like because of how we eat and like the standard American diet and things like that. And so he's talking about a number of different things that are tied to like biological evolution, brain-based evolution, all kinds of other things. While I found this interesting, I will say for the average reader, I think this is quite dry and quite academic. And so like if this is an area of interest to you, or if you are interested in Csikszentmihalyi's work more generally, just because of other things you've read, like this to me is more of like a niche interest area versus like everybody should pick up this book because of like how fascinating it is. So I would just mention that. I think that if you're drawn to the description I'm offering to you, feel free to pick it up, but I think it's not necessarily going to be as interesting to the average reader. All right, after that, I read the last 3 books in Catherine Cowell's series, and the series is called Sparrow Falls. And these are all interconnected narratives of basically like foster siblings who have various romances, small town romances, mystery, suspense. This is what Catherine Cowell's is known for. There is a couple, though, that is kind of set up throughout the entire 6-book series, and they're in book 6. And pretty much this couple, everything I've seen in the reviews, everybody's like, I've been waiting for this couple's story. And basically they are 2 of the foster siblings that are raised together for a couple of years. Like the male main character comes into the foster house, I think when he's like 16 or something like that. So it's not like they've been raised together since they were young children, but they are in love with each other. They've been in love with each other for a long time. They've been kind of trying to deny this. And in this book, they finally come together. This is the final book in the series. So I ended up reading book 4, 5, and 6, which is Beautiful Exile, Chasing Shelter, and Secret Haven. Secret Haven is the book I think that everybody was kind of waiting for with this final relationship. And all of these are pretty solid. I mean, I think that the author Catherine Cowles, does a really nice job of balancing out the romance piece with the mystery suspense piece. So if that is a subgenre of romance that you enjoy, this is definitely an author that I would consider checking out. Okay, then I read a book called We Had a Hunch by Tom Ryan, and it was delightful. This is a book about teenagers who solve crimes, and it ends up resulting in a couple of deaths. And so they stop. They're like, we shouldn't be doing this anymore. And then they grow into adults, and then they get sucked back into solving crimes as adults. And it was creative. It was fun. There were like these like twisty elements of their relationships as kids that get brought into the adult, character identities. I would absolutely read another book by this author. So this one was really fun. I kind of like stumbled across it. Somebody had mentioned it, and just the title alone, I kind of looked it up. And it's such a good example of just like finding something random and really ending up enjoying it. Okay, next, I finished the yoga therapy book that I've been trying to finish for like 2 months. And I really, really liked it. So this is a book that basically goes through the philosophy of yoga therapy. So it talks about a lot of the history of yoga and kind of the philosophy of yoga, but then it also blends into different parts of anatomy and how you have to take certain parts of anatomy into account when you're doing yoga therapy. And basically what yoga therapy is it's a way of treating like very specific diseases or ailments with yoga as a part of the healing practice. So for example, you might think about like, how might you use yoga to help with something like arthritis or Parkinson's disease, or even like anxiety or something like that. And one of the things I really, really liked about this book is I would say the last like third of it was talking about specific parts of the body. Like if you have like a knee surgery or something like that, these are specific things that you can do that would kind of come back from that and that would help someone to heal from that. So I sat down one day and I probably gave 5 hours to this just to kind of get through it. I knew it was dipping in and out of it was not working. So I just kind of dedicated, half a day to just like getting through it. And I'm really glad I did. I really enjoyed it. And there was a lot that I was able to pick up and take away from that. And I'll just mention as an aside, if you haven't watched previous videos, that I am in a yoga therapy training program right now, which is why I picked up this book in the first place. So it's not just like a random interest, like it's part of other educational stuff that I'm looking into. Okay, then this was very exciting. On NetGalley, which is a place where you can get advanced readers copies of books. Anyone can get these advanced readers copies. You can request them. Sometimes there are advanced readers copies that like everyone can have access to for like a 72-hour period. This is free. Like you can create a NetGalley account if you want to do that. Sometimes you request things from publishers and they will not give you them, but sometimes like I recently requested 2 different books and I was approved to read these books in advance. Well, I got this email that for 72 hours you could download Inside Man by John McMahon. This is the second book in, what is the series called? Head Cases. So the first book is called Head Cases. And this is about an FBI agent who sees patterns. And while it is not stated, it is implied that he is autistic. And in the first book, he is leading a team, or he's part of a team that is like known for these patterns that they can seek out. And they're hunting a serial killer who is killing other serial killers. In this second book, which I did download. This comes out in January. So I knew that, and I was so excited because I read the first book and I saw this was available and I like immediately went and downloaded it. I probably read this in like 2 days. You know how people will say like no notes on this book. It was so well paced. The character development was fantastic. There are like 3 different plot lines that are coming together. It is just perfect in terms of how he does this. I was so impressed by this. This was like one of my top books of the year, like easily. I was so happy that I got this in advance and that I was able to read it. So at a very high level, basically what is happening is there's so many things I don't want to give away. Basically there is a case where they're trying to understand guns. Like there are people who are producing guns illegally. So this is like one situation that's happening. Then there is a serial killer that is operating that, and I won't explain exactly how, but is tied to this gun case situation. And so this is like a parallel situation that they are also trying to figure out. And then there is this like other plot that's happening around the FBI group itself and like how it is being formed and like who is leading that group and like kind of the inner workings of that group, and even a slight romance is happening within this group. I was so like blown away. I continue to be blown away by this author. This is also an author who has written another series that I've started and quickly becoming one of my favorites. So I cannot recommend this enough. I think it comes out in like mid-January. I'm probably seeing this in the details. Okay, January 13th. So mark your calendars, because I think read Head Cases now. You'll want to pick this up. If you are a mystery reader and you enjoy mysteries, this may become one of your new favorite series. So highly, highly, highly recommend that one. All right, then I picked up a book called The Librarians by Sherry Thomas, because if a book is called The Librarians, I will pick it up. This is basically kind of like a mystery set amongst a bunch of librarians. What I was surprised by, I don't know what I was expecting necessarily, but it has this like multiple POV setup where there are like very clear storylines for each of these characters. And for some reason, I thought it was just going to be like an ensemble plot, like where you have all these different people, but actually you're following a lot of these different like parallel situations with the librarians. I think because I wasn't expecting that, it was a little bit hard for me to follow. I enjoyed it. I thought it was well written. I thought it was creative. I would probably pick something else up by this author. But it threw me off a little bit in terms of just, I think I had an expectation of what the book would be, and it ended up being something pretty different. Okay, then I read Soul Searching by Lila Sage. And Lila Sage is known for another series that I'm looking up right now. And it is the Rebel Blue Ranch series. So this is a romance series. This is a new series, Soul Searching, called Sweetwater Peak series. And I read the first book in the Blue Rebel Ranch series, and some people have like loved this series, and I was like, okay, it's fine. Like it wasn't anything that I was like really, really excited about. This book I really enjoyed. It is about a woman who can see ghosts, and she moves back to this town where her parents are living. And she ends up, for various reasons, having to move in with this guy as like a roommate. And there's all these ghosts that are trying to like throw them together. It was super fun. Like, I think I picked this up because it was like kind of an October read. I think a lot of people were reading it in October. Highly recommend this. Would totally pick up the second book in the series. I really, really liked how the author was bringing in this like fun, kind of almost like humorous element of these ghosts and what was happening. Obviously, the male main character is somebody who's like very skeptical about this whole situation, but then he ends up kind of believing what's going on. So it was really fun. And I think it set up some really nice future books in this series. So really like that one. Then I read Twisted Hate in the Anna Huang series, which is called Twisted. And this is the third book. I believe it's just a trilogy where basically interconnected narratives. This male main character in this book is the brother of the female main character in the first book in the trilogy. And basically ends up having, he's a doctor. He ends up having this relationship with a lawyer in training. And it's enemies to lovers. I will say that there's like some subplots in this book there's like a blackmail subplot and some other things that are just, they're unbelievable. Like you just have to kind of set that aside. I think these books are known for being like relatively traditional in terms of their subplots. They're pretty steamy. I mean, I think that's what draws a lot of people to this particular trilogy. And I'm glad I read it. Like, I think that this is an author that I see everywhere, and she's got multiple series. I'll probably pick up other books in her other series. Very popular. And I think of the three books, the first one I probably liked the best, which is not uncommon, but these other ones were pretty solid as well. The second book in the series, which I think I read last month, is the one about the princess and the bodyguard. So if you watched my last video, also, not quite believable, but pretty fun to pick up, and easy, like quick reads if you're looking for something like that too. Okay, the next book I picked up was devastating. It is called Releasing 10 by Chloe Walsh. This is the 6th book in the Boys to Men series. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you have heard me talk about this series. I love it. It is about these teenagers in this Irish high school who are having romances, and they are just in these situations. Like, the first 2 books are about the same couple, and the girl is going through like this very significant like domestic violence situation, and she ends up, I mean, there's so many twists and turns. Then books 3 and 4 are about her brother, who is embroiled in this like addiction situation, and so then you have that whole thing going on. Then you have book 5, which is kind of like a standalone. It doesn't have a paired book with it. It's about one of their friends, and there's, I mean, trigger warnings across this entire series. Significant trigger warnings in book 6 for child sexual abuse. But the way that this is set up, like basically in the 6th book, you have a female main character who you find out relatively early on is being sexually abused. There's a connection from that to an earlier book in the series. So like, read the books in order. If you are interested in this series, read the books in order. But she is also dealing with some significant mental health issues from a very young age. And I don't think it's really a spoiler to say eventually she is diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but this onsets when she's like 6 years old. So there's this like, the devastating part is kind of like she is unclear about what is happening to her as a child, because she has these like mental illness things, and she's basically gaslit by all of these adults in her life in just really horrible ways. And they don't know. I mean, like, it's just heartbreaking. I mean, it's so devastating. And of course there's a romance element. She has this male friend from when she's a very small child, and he's like trying to help her with all of these different things, not knowing about the abuse situation, but like trying to help her. And I was about 20, so I'm listening to this on audio, in a hotel gym because I was traveling. And so every morning I would get up in the hotel gym and I'd be like running and listening to this book because I was so compelled. And there's basically, I was like 20 minutes from being done with the audiobook, and I was like, oh, this is not going to wrap up. Like this, I will like figured out this is not going to end well. First of all, it is not a happy ending. So I will just say that. And there's clearly a setup for another book about this couple. Like it's not out yet. And from what I understand, the 7th book in the series is not about this couple. It like goes back to something else earlier in the series. This is probably gonna be like a 15-book series, and I will read every single one of them. Like, I don't know what this author puts in these books. Like, they're just so incredibly compelling. The audio is fantastic. I think they would also be fine to read text-based as well. You will continue to hear me rave about this series. I think that the way she writes these characters is so emotionally compelling and just completely devastating for book 6. So I don't know what else to say. I highly, highly recommend that series. Okay. Then I picked up We Are All Guilty Here by Karin Slaughter. Karin Slaughter is a mystery author that I have read for 15 years. Like, I don't know when. She has a series that came out forever ago, and then she eventually merged it with another series. And one of the things I love about Karin Slaughter is she is not afraid to like take a dark turn. She writes very dark psychological thrillers, but she also like will kill off beloved characters. I mean, like, she will do all kinds of things that are like part of the reality of what is happening in these books. And this is a new series. So she has these other long-standing series that have been happening for a long time. She's written some standalones. Some of them have been adapted into films and, you know, various other things. Like, I think that she's really carved out a space for herself as a very well-known mystery and thriller writer. I really, really liked this new series. I was excited about it because I trust her at this point. Like, I feel like I've read pretty much everything she's ever written. And this is a series about a set of disappearances. 2 girls go missing, and we eventually find out what happens to them. And then it kind of goes into the future, and another girl goes missing, and it's kind of tied back to the situation, and we're kind of like trying to understand what happened. And you have a small town sheriff whose father is also a police officer. There's like a family of police officers. And then we find out that there's an estranged sister of the sheriff who's a police officer, or I don't know if she becomes the sheriff or she's the daughter of the sheriff. and her estranged sister is an FBI agent, and she ends up coming back to this town when she sees this new missing girl, and they start to have this like collaboration basically. Really fun twists at the end with like totally setting up some like super interesting stuff with this family dynamic and what's happening in the small town. And I felt like this book had all of the elements of what you want in a first book in a new series, of just like, you're clearly setting up like depth with the characters, some really interesting dynamics with like their history and what we're learning about them. So totally hit it out of the park, which does not surprise me. I think Karen Slaughter is fantastic. All right, next I picked up Poldark by Winston Graham. And this is a book that was kind of like a palate cleanser for me after like all of these other devastation books that I've been reading. This is a book that takes place, I think, in like the 1700s. There's a guy who goes off to war. He comes back. He's injured. He is supposed to have a fiance or like a love interest, and she has like gone off with another guy. And so he's like dealing with that situation. He also comes back, and like the home that he comes back to is like in disarray, and he has to like, you know, clean up all these things. This is a series that's described as a saga. I mean, there are multiple books in this series. It was made into like a show on PBS. I've seen this around and I just never read it. And I will say I liked it. I feel like there are other historical books set in this time period that are a little bit more like crisp in terms of like their description and the accuracy of what they're trying to describe. This felt a little bit loose to me in terms of like, not that it was inaccurate, but it kind of felt like it was skimming over some things in ways that I've read other historical fiction that's like really digging into the details. So I might try a second book in this just to kind of see what I think. But I don't know that I'm going to read the whole series. Glad I tried it. Will absolutely look up the PBS show and see if I can track it down somewhere to watch a couple of the episodes, because I think that'd be really fun. All right, then I picked up Tourist Season by Brynne Weaver. And Brynne Weaver is very well known for another trilogy that is called, let me see if I can find it, the Ruinous Love Trilogy, which is basically about serial killers falling in love with other serial killers. And Tourist Season is the first book in the Seasons of Carnage trilogy, which is about serial killers falling in love with other serial killers. She has found a niche, and she is leveraging that niche. And I will say part of the niche is she starts every book with trigger warnings of like the crazy things that are going to happen in the book that are usually pretty gross. I found this book to be entertaining. I found the first book in the Ruinous Love trilogy, like it was creative and it was different. I feel like now she's found the niche and she's just digging into it. Like I find that the books are a little bit formulaic, you know, in terms of like she has found a formula that seems to be working, and so she is just leveraging that, and good for her. Like I don't hold anything against that. This particular book is about a woman who's living in a small town, and she is the caretaker for a man who is also a killer who has memory problems. And so she is trying to basically keep him from killing people. She kills people, and then this other guy comes into town and he kills people, and they all start to have like, you know, a situation together basically where they're like trying to keep themselves from being caught with like a number of things that are happening. And they kind of stumble into the fact of knowing that everyone else is killing everyone. So, I mean, there's dark humor. I will say this is meant to be dark humor. There is romance. This is also, you know, pretty spicy in terms of what she sets up in all of her books. So I will probably continue to read this trilogy, but I definitely think that she has, like I said, she's found the niche and she's just kind of like leaning into it. All right, then I read a book called Grace and Henry's Holiday Movie Marathon by Matthew Norman. This book is so charming. It is about two people who have lost their partners to various reasons. The male main character, his wife dies in a plane crash. The female main character, her husband dies of cancer. And they're kind of like thrown into each other's lives by their mothers. Like their mothers kind of set them up basically. And they realize this is what's happening. And they end up just being friends, like for a very long time in the books. And it's set up around these holiday movies that they are either watching together or there's some kind of theme around the holiday movie that comes into the storyline. The female main character has a couple of kids. They add this like really fun element to the relationship. And it's basically two people who are like trying to find their way after like really hard circumstances in their lives. adorable. Like, I think it's a great holiday read. I think it hits all the right notes in terms of kind of like overcoming grief. And I really like that one. All right, then I read a book called Imagine Adore by Laura Stanfill. And this is a book, it's like 500 pages long. It is a NetGalley book. This was an advanced reader's copy. This book comes out, it came out actually this year in April 25. So it's an advanced reader's copy, but already released. And this is a book about publishing, about writing and publishing. And the woman who writes it is somebody who owns a very small press. Like, they put out like a handful of books a year. And she has also published, like traditionally published, at least one book. And she's basically giving a behind the scenes of like, how do you navigate contemporary publishing culture right now if you are a writer and you're like trying to break into getting a book published. The more fascinating components of this book to me were the more technical parts. Like, at one point she talks about distribution, which is something that I just didn't understand, the distinctions between what was happening with like the big 5 publishers and what was happening in these small presses. She talks about self-publishing quite a bit. She's got a bit of a chip on her shoulder against Amazon, and that comes out pretty clear in this book. And I do think that Amazon is a pretty big self-publishing arm right now for a lot of people. And so that was like one drawback I found, was like there was just no neutrality about that whatsoever, which I can understand to some extent, but it also felt like there was a miss of just like information, because she just didn't want to acknowledge it like at all. The other thing I would say too is, as somebody who has published quite a bit, you know, like I've been publishing my books through academic presses for, 15 years, you know, at this point. And I've had several books published. There was a lot here that was more focused on kind of fiction and poetry and like other kinds of things that were not academic. She does address academic presses at a certain point, but it's definitely not academic publishing. It's more like taking nonfiction that is not necessarily academic nonfiction and pushing it toward a press. Like, that could be poetry, it could be other kinds of things. So I found this interesting. I also found that she was like pretty realistic about how hard it is to kind of navigate through, and how unlikely it is that even if you work, you know, your entire writing career, like you may not get picked up. And that it can be really challenging to get an agent. It can be really challenging for that agent to land you a contract. What's nice in academic publishing is you don't have to use agents. And so, you know, you can typically just work directly with publishers to get books out. And so there were definitely some things that I picked up and learned from this book. I will say I found it to be incredibly long. There's probably ways that it could have been slimmed down. There was a little bit of information that felt repetitive just because of the way the book was organized. But in general, if you were trying to get like a foothold into like what are the basic things you need to know about contemporary publishing, I mean, I would definitely recommend this. I think that it's got a lot there to recommend itself in terms of just like the technical pieces that she was talking about. Okay, then the last book that I read in the month of November is one that I've been chipping away at for a couple of months now, and this is Professor Cromer Learns to Read. This is by Janet Cromer, and it is the story, kind of a harrowing story actually, about her husband has a heart attack when they were on an airplane. They have not left the airport, they're like on the ground. But he experiences a period of time basically where as he's having this heart attack, he's lost oxygen, you know, it's very difficult for them to bring him back to life. And he suffers basically a traumatic brain injury from going through this experience. And he, in his life before this happens, is a professor. You know, he's a very well-known writer and scholar. And then he has this situation where he basically has to relearn pretty much everything. He has to relearn how to read, how to walk. He has aphasia where he's like struggling with words. And she becomes basically his full-time caretaker. Also, what's kind of interesting about this story, I don't feel like this is a spoiler, is he needs to have more like surgery because of the heart situation that he's in, but they don't want to do that until he has some rehabilitation of his brain, because there's concern that if they go in and do the heart surgery like immediately after, you know, everything that's going on, and the fact that he's been like weakened by this whole situation, he's going to lose even more of like his cognitive abilities. So he goes through this rehabilitation period of time And we hear all about it. Like the book is basically about how is he recovering from this brain injury. And this book was, it's interesting. It's also a little bit awful. It really is talking about the grief that this woman is experiencing because she basically loses the husband that she knew. And she is now taking care of this like entirely different person. There's some things about him that are the same, but there's a lot about him that is very different. And she is, committed to this person, married to this person. But there's a lot about like his actions and his emotions that like he can't control anymore. And they have to work around a lot of that. She has some family support. She has like other kinds of things she's trying to work through, but it completely changes their lives. And they both end up becoming basically on the speaker circuit for traumatic brain injury and how it can impact relationships. And, it's like they make lemonade out of lemons. They do an incredible service, I think, for that community. And it's fascinating to hear, her story of how she dealt with this, but also just incredibly sad. I think this is why it took me a while to read this one, because I would read it like in small chunks and then it was just sad. So I would set it aside and then come back to it later because I just felt like this was a tough one. I do think that this is something that we probably don't talk about as much as we should. This book is old. It took me a while to track down a copy. I'd had this on my to be read pile for years and years and years. It was originally published, this says 2010. I think it might be older than that. So it's just a really interesting story of the relationship, of the brain injury, of the recovery, like all of those things. I think she does a fantastic job of documenting. But yeah, I left it just kind of like, it doesn't necessarily have a happy ending. Like it's educational and it has a purpose in terms of why she was sharing the story. But it's also kind of just like tragic, what these two people experienced together. So that's how I closed out November. Some really, really good books this month. Some very like emotional books that packed in a lot, maybe more than I was expecting of like, an emotional response from me. And I'm excited to go into the next month and see what else I'm gonna have a chance to read. So take a look at my December TBR video if you want to see what I'm going to be reading in this next month. I would love for you to drop in the comments below what you read in November that you want me to maybe add to my pile. I always love to add new books to my pile. And until the next video, happy reading.